Let me introduce the next session, and that's Interoperability in AI. Is there such a thing? Is an eclectic group of presenters, and the session is hosted by Hans Hoffmann. And let me bring up his bio. Hans Hoffmann was born in Munich, Germany. Then.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to be quick. My name is Veronica Panetta. I'm a manager at Deluxe Media in their Localization and Media Services Department and the TC Secretary at 35PM IMF with Cinti. I'm just here to give a quick rollout. We have beautiful swag from Amblin Entertainment, from Jaws to we have shirts, ducks, large ducks, actually. And we're going to be handing out some tickets to you at the end of the panel. We're going to go ahead and call out some numbers. So just a heads up. Hopefully you're the lucky one, but thank you. Off to you, Hans.
Thank you. So, colleagues, I'm from Munich, as you know, which is not Germany. Okay, colleagues, you can't leave this room now because the doors will be locked very soon before the unconference. Huh? We need your input. Colleagues, this is now a very fascinating panel session. And the reason why it's fascinating is the title. Look at that. Interoperability in AI. Is there such a thing? I think we need to ask the question. And no better than the world-class elite panelists, which will be coming up now, to answer and discuss and answer this question with me. So we have Simon Crownshaw. Simon, come up from Microsoft. Buzz Hayes from Google. Asim Jalis from AWS, and Jason Schugardt from NVIDIA. And you know what? I'm super happy to have all of them sitting in peace here. So far, we're checking the microphones. To discuss this, pretty much, I think it's a very existential question for also SMPT as an organization. When you look at it, I mean, this organization lived from an engine which was called the standards community. And the standards community has always provided output, which then was leveraged by the industry, by education, knowledge sharing, actually moving the industry, allowing the industry and the economy to grow. And I think it's very important to discuss now what's happening in an AI-driven world, in a media AI-driven world. And the way how we run this session now to discuss the question, and please, now it's also time again to use the tool, because everything what you're gonna post will be analyzed, will be summarized for the unconference. So perhaps you can, I know it's difficult to ask, you can now stop emailing and concentrating what the colleagues say. So the way how running it, everybody has now 5 minutes from their point of view to discuss this fundamental question here. Standards, is there such a thing? And after the 5 minutes, we go into a dialogue with each other to see whether we can identify some commonalities forward. First presenter is Simon from Microsoft. If you want to read his bio, it's very long. Please do that. We don't read that. We give Simon now the opportunity directly to... You come up here? Yes, of course. Because here is also the magic device. Please, Simon. And thank you for coming.
Thank you, Hans. It's great to be here. This is my first time at SMPT. Long heard about it. Spent a lot of time talking to some of you in the room. I had to be honest. When I was talking to Hans about presenting today and being part of his panel, which I'm very grateful to be here, I asked myself a very good question, I think, which is, do standards and interoperability matter in the world of AI? And I like to be provocative, just so you know. But I think in a nuanced world, yes, they do, right? As a media pipeline that is in full transition from wherever we are, wherever you spend time, I think today's challenges and the AI-driven creation that we're seeing I think interoperability really, really critical, whether you're an individual creator, a large studio, a broadcaster. No question in my mind that without interoperability, we certainly see more tech debt. For those of you who don't know, I spent most of my career at the Walt Disney Company, and in a variety of different roles. At Microsoft, now leading M&E worldwide. Some of you will even ask, Microsoft has an M&E division? Yes, we do. But I think ultimately, as you look about the transition that's taking place in media today, which has been faster than it's ever been, I will tell you that I've had some amazing conversations over the past 2 years, whether that be talking about Sora or even Buzz's VO3 and everything else. There's just so many questions about different models that are going on. But I think what we're seeing is now innovation above the standard stack, right? And when I put this slide together, I didn't quite realize I put the base at the top and the top layer at the bottom, but it's fine. I think obviously standards and interoperability are important. They are the essential foundation of where we are. I think they need to change a little bit in terms of accepting what's happening in an AI-driven world. But they are the pieces that connect us. But I think as we get to the bottom, where the true differentiation starts to occur, I think that's what we're going to see mature over time. I think experience, intelligence, trust, it's all driven by data. I think there isn't any customer that I'm talking to today that hasn't figured out that their data is not good enough to drive where we need to go. There's no question of that. I think whether we're talking about AI models that work together, I think we talk about one model, maybe we have to chain more models together. But a sustainable advantage for those media companies that need to think about that together, for sure. There is some new DNA being built across our media pipeline that we see every day. And so from that perspective, what I thought about to land on the last statement before I finish my 5 minutes, in this era of semantic alignment around standards, right? What do we need to learn, right? What are we thinking about? It's not just a standard for the sake of having a standard. But how do we give it more context? Everyone thinks about model context protocol, what meaning moves between these intelligent layers. How do we learn more as we go? If we're building agents, how do they get smarter? How do they learn the processes that we're talking about today? I think I want standards that adapt dynamically to the workflow, not freeze it in time. I think if I'll be a little bit provocative, a lot of the people who are creating content today with some of the new models, even in the creator economy, they should be involved in the conversation about where we are ending up. I think there is no question that they can be involved in helping corral some of the standards that we need to look at as we move forward, right? And bring new intelligence to both a machine, man and machine working together, and a human working together in that element together. So I think that's true. I think I'll go back to what I started by saying is, does AI make standards obsolete? I don't think so. I think it redefines their purpose in terms of where they stand. I think we need to enable understanding. The data today is not good enough. I think we're going to end up in a world where we are looking at more synthetic data than we've ever looked at. How do we control synthetic data? How do we provide standards around that as well to move forward? So for me, from a Microsoft perspective, that's what we're focused on. Obviously, we're not in the world of creating content 24/7, but we're there as a platform underneath in terms of how we support. We think about the data foundation layer, the agents that we build, that we support, the models that we work through. And so from that perspective, it's really powerful to be here. I think you have a lot of power in the industry in terms of what you can bring, especially as AI becomes more predominant. And I really appreciate my 5 minutes. I'm excited to spend the next hour with you, talk to what interoperability means. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. And also good that you mentioned your function and role. I forgot that. Apologize. Buzz Hayes. And you can mention, please, also your function and role globally.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Buzz Hayes. For those who don't know me, I'm a recovering producer. And I've been at Google for 7.5 years. I'm the global market lead for the media and entertainment practice there. And I've been a big fan of standards my entire career because I started as a filmmaker and plan to end that way too, by the way. So this whole idea of interoperability in AI is an important subject. And standardization, I'm going to talk a little bit about both ends of the spectrum here because one of the things I focus on, which I'm not going to focus too much on in this presentation, but I wanted to mention it, is the development of the generative models that we have. So work very closely with the DeepMind team. We've got Jay Cherian's here from our Black Belt team, who is an integral part of these conversations we have internally. And part of the reason I mention this is because we have to make sure that these teams who are building these amazing models understand what standards are, right? I mean, when you first look at some of these AI models, they didn't even understand a decent frame rate. 15, that's good, right? No. So, color depth, things like that. So we're working both ends of the spectrum here. We're working with the teams to make sure that the model, if people plan to use this in a professional context, which I assume most people are not just going to use it on YouTube Shorts and Snapchat, then we need to make sure that we're adhering to the standards that already exist. And so I think that's a fundamental part of building some of these foundational models. But what I want to talk a little bit more about, and Simon had mentioned this in his talk, is this idea of model context protocols. It's an area that I think is ripe for the conversation about some standardization. And for those, I'll show you a slide here in a second about where it all came from. But it's it's happened so fast. I mean, the fact that we were at we had our own conference back in April of last year where we announced VO2, and then 3 weeks later we announced VO3. I was like, whoa, hang on. How fast is this going to go? So you have to wonder sometimes if the standardization is going to fall behind because of the rapid deployment of all these tools. But I think there's some fundamental issues that the industry wants to solve. And that has to do with this idea of training and optimizing models. It's become far more common to have agents that are connecting systems now, which is fine if you're in an ecosystem where you can control the whole thing, but a lot of companies don't, right? So we have to really think about this idea of how MCP servers are going to help this process of standardization, how things talk to each other. It does remind me a little bit of those days we've all been in those conversations where we're going to standardize metadata, right? And did we do that? I forget. I think no. We're kind of in the same vein there where models are going to do what they want to do. They're going to have various inputs and outputs that other models maybe don't adhere to. So, we do have to have ways for these things to talk to each other. So here's just a quick little history lesson here, because how many of you are not familiar with the Model Context Protocol? Anybody? Most people are? Okay. So this is actually not even a year old yet. This happened, Anthropic put this idea together back in November of last year. So we're barely on 11 months. And there's already a lot of developments happening in this world. And essentially, the concept behind it is you have clients and servers, and the ability to talk to each other. And there's inputs and outputs, just like everything else we do in the media business, right? And there's a lot of tools and resources, and some are model controlled, some are user controlled, and certainly some are application controlled. So all of these things have messaging going in and out, and files going in and out, and all sorts of things. But what's interesting about the MCP deployments as they exist right now, and again, it's still early days, is it's a great way for these models to communicate with themselves and with each other. We have a lot of open source models on the market now, and there's a lot of reason why these models should talk to each other. But you have to be careful about what they're doing in that communication and how they're doing that. And so I think, without going into too much detail on this particular slide, I think the one takeaway when it comes to this idea of how how model context protocols require a little more forethought is in the idea of best practices and things, because this is the single most significant issue around MCP right now, which is security. When they're all running in any of our native clouds that you can imagine here, everybody here is representing some form of cloud or ecosystem, then we can control how these things talk to each other. But these are leaky systems. You have to be very, very careful. And I think security is the number one thing people have to think about, especially in this day and age of agentic workflows where agents are talking to each other and humans don't necessarily intervene. So what is that agent talking to that's making a decision on somebody's behalf? I think security is everything. And so, for example, running MCPs locally, which you can do, is a very risky proposition because you don't have the same level of security that any of us have with the infrastructure that we use. So There was already interoperability to a certain degree with everybody assembled here, but I think once it gets into the real world where people are like, I'm going to spin up an MCP server for this, that, and the other thing and stick it on my uncle's server in his garage, you've suddenly opened yourself up to some massive security risks. So just wanted to point out that security is probably the main thing we need to talk about, and it might be more recommended practices. And then finally, if anybody wants to play with this stuff, if you really want to get your head around it, there's a couple of resources here. These are all GitHub repos. This is all publicly available stuff that allows you to spin up servers and understand what they're all about. And there's one that Go implementation on there as well. So anyway, I think it's worth people getting used to what these MCPs are all about, how we can help secure that. And I think the conversation around that should be, let's get the models to behave correctly, and let's get 24 frames to be actually 24 frames. Let's start there, and then work towards how do these things talk to each other in a secure and safe way. And I think SMPTE has a role in that.
Well, many thanks. Excellent. Thank you for pointing this out. And we move on with our colleagues from AWS. Yeah. Asim, Jalis, you have the floor. Don't forget to tell us about your function and role.
Okay, sure. Will do. All right. So, hello everyone. My name is Asim Jalis. I'm a solutions architect. I'm focused on the MEGS vertical. So I work with all the media, entertainment, game, and sports customers, and specifically in the area of AI. And it's really interesting. So I think as far as the question is concerned about interoperability and AI, I think we're seeing that as the previous Simon and Buzz mentioned, but we're seeing in the industry with MCP and A2A and other standards emerging. So definitely I think it is a thing, but I think it's also extremely critical for a lot of our media customers. So AWS is a cloud provider, and standard and interoperability are critical for customers, first of all, because this allows the customers to choose the best tool for the job as they're building out and curating their workflows. They're not locked into using one specific set of tools. They can combine them. Also for vendors, I think it allows them to focus on what they're best at instead of trying to cobble together an entire end-to-end application. And then I think overall standards and interoperability help the whole industry. So it lifts all boats, increases the market share. So with our customers in AWS, I think this is something, interoperability and standards is something AWS supports because it helps solve customer problems with increasing tool choice, and then also helps our partners. So within the standards, there's some of the AI-specific standards like MCP and A2A, which allow agents to talk to each other or agents to talk to tools. And those are certainly important, but I feel like for the media use cases, we have to focus on extensions of those standards to media, because these are very broad horizontal standards. They apply to all industries. And I think within media, though, there are specific use cases as companies build out these workflows. For example, there's metadata extraction. So if I identify a celebrity, a tool can identify a celebrity in a video and then specify the time code where that celebrity image or face occurs and where it occurs on the frame. So those are things that currently are not interoperable. So if you have a MAM, for example, they might support some AI tools and they might not support others. At the same time, I think AI in some ways solves that problem itself. So first, it would be nice to have a standard where you could just swap out and use the best tool for case recognition or transcription. But also in the absence of a unified standard, which is maybe still in the process of emerging, I think AI solves that problem to some extent, because it's very easy to now build custom tools or scripts that can convert between standards using AI. And so I think I think it'll be interesting to have this panel discussion and just to see how we can make progress towards interoperability in AI, especially in media. But I feel like besides the broad AI standards, we also have the media-specific standards like C2 PA and other standards. And I think that's an area where it would be good to collaborate with everyone and make sure we are building standards that support all the different media use cases that our customers and our vendors have in mind. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Asim. Last but not least of this super group here, Jason.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Schugardt. I am a senior solutions architect at NVIDIA. Just to give you a little bit of my background so you know where I'm coming from. I joined NVIDIA 3 years ago, but before that I spent over 25 years in the visual effects industry. So very familiar with all sorts of standards in broadcast and film. So I'm a huge fan of standards. I love them. There's so many of them. So to really understand where we're going, I'd like to quickly talk about where we've been so we can dot the line out into the future here. 2012, I don't know if a big moment for us was AlexNet. There was something called ImageNet, a contest where a bunch of researchers would get together and try and identify a cat inside of image. And this was done programmatically for years. Ilya Sutskever, Alex Shizetsky, and Jeffrey Hinton, those who might know, godfather of AI, came up with a new way using neural networks and 2 NVIDIA GPUs across empowered by CUDA to use neural networks to detect a cat inside of an image out of the ImageNet contest. So why this is important, this blew the doors off of any other technique that was used at the time. It was far faster. Up to that point, training models to do this would take an incredibly long time. So this really started the foot race here for us. So you might say, like, how did NVIDIA know that AI was going to blow up in 2022? No, it took, it was 10 years in the making to make that happen. So here we go on to different models. Here we're going to go on to perception AI. So this has been, everybody's familiar with this, speech recognition, system recommenders. So going to any, going on a web page or going on to your favorite streaming channel. What channel have you watched? What other, all the things you watched. These are the other users that like that sort of thing. Those are, REST recommendation systems. So, tons of applications use this, fairly easy technology, but also AI, right? So next, generative AI, which is where we're starting to get into the fun stuff. And I think really folks took notice that we're now doing creative things, taking, generating text. Who knew, like at this, nexus of having all of human data on the internet, if you train a computer on just that corpus of data, you can get intelligence. And the longer you train and the more data you get, the more intelligent it is. So it's a pretty amazing thing. And now we're starting to dot the lines out, like what it's going to take. And right now, there's reason capability. And I think those of you who've played with ChatGPT and other models like that, have seen this. What I think is interesting is where that's going, because that's just trained on text. Now there's multimodal models. So we're doing, video and audio, and, pretty soon we're going to talk about physical AI, where that's including, the understanding of physical objects in the world, right? So robotics, that's grabbing a piece of paper, understanding how it moves and how it feels in your hand. All of that data gives you a physical sense and an understanding of the world you're living in, and an innate reasoning capability above beyond what you could ever ask ChatGPT, right? So you're still getting questions. It's getting better and better, but I think that's going to be the next level, and that's another layer of data, which we're missing that data, right? You can have lifetimes of data with a headset and wear cameras and manipulators and build video data for a robot. but that's not enough data. You could have, so what we're doing is we are doing that. We have people wearing headsets and looking through cameras and recording that data, but we're now generating additional data, synthetic data that sits on top of that. So you can imagine all of the data that's, 10 times, 10,000 times the amount of data it takes to make a cup of tea, for any robot to go into a home and make a cup of tea out of all the homes that exist on the planet. They need to have a ton of data to be able to train and do that. Now imagine being able to negotiate the price of bananas at the store, at the checkout aisle, understanding what, somebody's upset or sad, or like all of the human interactions that we take for granted. That's another level. So we haven't even gotten to that part. So that's where things are going to. Actions that we take for granted. That's another level. So we haven't even gotten to that part. So that's where things are going to. I think for the next step for us in the next over the next year is agentic AI and physical AI. Agentic AI is what we've already been talking about for the last year or so, where models are now given tasks, and it turns out if you let them think longer, like there's multiple ways of making a model smarter, not just giving it a new prompt, not just fine tuning, adding extra data to a current model that you already have. You can you let it reason longer, or a mixture of experts where you take multiple models and you chain them together. You combine them to let each model speak when it's in its domain. So there's a bunch of ways to make these models smarter. And agentic AI is a way to empower that. And I think on the standards topic, already brought up, MCP is the way that's happening, where you're interacting with, other services, being able to go out and reach out and get new data, to make that model, more intelligent. Be able to check a web page, be able to check the temperature, things that are active, not necessarily that are built into its understanding and into the parameters that it already has. So where is that going? Where am I going with this? This is something where, you have along this line, we could talk about standards, but at what point do we start to lock off on the innovation, right? So at one end of the spectrum, we have fully chaos. People are figuring out how things work, right? Everything's built on transformer networks now. Do we set that as a standard? Where do we, at what point do you bring in, and lock off things where we're going? I think we're good. We're on time. Okay. Yeah. All right. So, I think, we have an exciting talk ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Chase. Thank you, Chase. Don't forget barcode. We need your input. And I think what the colleagues have here explained already are good indicators for potential activities. Of course, every panel is a little bit prepared. Every panel is prepared. This panel is also prepared. I didn't tell them about the unprepared question. I spared this for the end. In a way, it strikes me that what you all have explained, very concrete stuff, thank you for doing so, but also asking a much more fundamental question. And I would like to reflect this to you. So when we look about AI in media workflows, and then you look maybe coming from the traditional world of how standards are done, because the panel is about standardization, interoperability, and achieving interoperability. Huh? I mean, you have brought in the example of MCP. Both shock to the world. Oh, it's used by almost everybody. And you are telling us afterwards there's this big security thing nobody have thought about, which we need to address. But where the hell is it addressed? And this brings me maybe to this question, which I would like to hear from all of you. In what mechanism, collaborative mechanism, would such a topic be quickly articulated, agreed that it is an issue, and solved with immense speed before somebody else wakes up at the next morning and has it already solved. So, and then makes all the efforts of a collaborative group redundant. So I don't know. I truly don't know how that could work, but my vision would be that such a collaborative thing would exist. I don't know. How would you reflect on this in a way? I mean, you brought the security up. Maybe start.
So the way I think about it, it's interesting because, I was trying to tell somebody this the other day that film started with exactly one piece of technology, and that was a camera. We used the sun, we used a bunch of actors, but we had a camera. And then you look at where we are today, and there's not a single department that isn't heavily burdened by technology somewhere along the line. So there's always been this relationship. And if you look at the press right now, it's as if the tech industry and the media industry are two different things. They've been the same thing since the get-go. It's just the companies are maybe different. So I think I love broadcast television as an example because things move so quickly. There's no chance to sit and ponder. You have to make a decision and move on. And I think, I do think television, especially with the adoption of things like real-time voice translation, things like that, there are going to have to be some standards that come into place very, very quickly for that because they just want to get on with it and move on. So I love that decision-making capability. In the feature film world, we tend to be, I don't want to call it lazy, but we take our time deciding on certain things, and we tend to work with whatever worked last time as opposed to try and really adopt the new thing so much. So my take on it is the community is kind of already there, but the conversation has been this, well, tech companies do this thing and we do that thing, but now we're talking about the same thing together. So we do have to at least pull the resources closer together to talk about it.
So building a community, but a different community. I mean, sorry, my dear SMPT friends. Many thanks for all my career in SMPTE, but maybe it need to be a different configuration than we have today with the very tough, straight processes. Because I'm an advocate of making SMPT, of course, stronger, but I take the point. Maybe we need to revisit the way how we do things. Simon, your view.
I mean, I think Buzz articulated it pretty well. I think that I also come from more of a film background, but I also relate to live very much, right, where there are requirements around like millisecond latency, especially when we're talking about like voice translation, things like that. Broadcasters, especially live event providers, have little to no time to validate certain things, but they also can try things really quickly as well, which I think is a unique feature of how they work through it. I think your perspective, Hans, around a community that doesn't exist today is probably right. I think there are a lot of voices. You look at the creator economy, right? And I don't want to talk about it too much, but I would say that look at the amount of content that's up on YouTube every day, every second that's viewed, and how much is getting created there, where there are some standards that could definitely be included in that process to be, and also include those people in that conversation about what do they need, how do they want to work through it, I think is really critical. Yeah. I think there's new platforms, there's new opportunities to engage. There are new tools and technologies appearing at a rate that I've almost never seen, right? Which I think is fair. And so how do they absorb the standards that need to exist to make even their tools, technology, or whatever they create even more usable in the ecosystem that we're putting together? So for me, I think it's a really important conversation. I think one where we need to be engaged a little bit more with other folks who are doing it, especially as technology is moving on so fast. I worry that even maybe Buzz and maybe yourself are missing certain things about where they come from. All of a sudden you're surprised by something that just appeared. But I actually really love the fact that on this panel, even you've got AWS, Microsoft, Google, and NVIDIA, right? All looking at figuring out those things because there is a lot of interoperability that needs to exist between all four of us to some degree, right? Even in that world. So I just think, there's no point in putting your head in the sand. You've got to increase the level of collaboration and communication around these pieces.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think it's really interesting where, so if you look, what's really happening too, the tools that we have right now, at least in software, there are tools out there, platforms out there like GitHub where people can upload something. It's open source. People grab it, pull it down, improve on it. It puts it out there for other people to grab and pull down and give notes on. So I don't know if anybody's played with Stable Diffusion, but at the end of 2022, the explosion, it was a command line tool for years, right? And nobody touched it. And it wasn't until somebody made a UI for AI using Gradio. It's a web interface, just a web page. All of a sudden, somebody pull it down. It's like, oh, this is awesome, but this could be better. And the guy was so responsive in making it, update it. And there was a team of people that were, working up and improving it like twice a week, 3 times a week. And things changed so quickly. And soon became another group that came in and did the same thing with, now going Comfy UI, right? So Comfy UI is now becomes a standard, right? And then it's a very soft standard. I think it's moving so quickly. It's really hard to nail it down. Like that should be it. I think we need to keep the innovation open. So I'm not ready to say that that's going to be where it lands. But the fact that you can put it in people's hands quickly, get notes back, and then build on it, and then they do a yes and, we get a lot of creativity in there. And I think we need a platform that allows that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can add, I wanted to add something to this as well, which is, I think related to the question about security and, the MCP standard, for example, and other security vulnerabilities. I think the community is important, but frequently the community is something very informal. It's not like not necessarily a hierarchical organization. It could be on Reddit, it could be on social media, or also on GitHub. So I think with standards, like there's a standard there were some presentations about earlier called TAMS, which has a implementation. So a lot of times these standards start out with an open source implementation. It's not really a standard at that point, but it's part of the evolution from that initial community to resolving issues as they come up. And I think once you have when you have a mailing list or GitHub or some other forum where people are communicating, then vulnerabilities are exposed and discussed and resolved. And there was an interesting incident with C2PA where there was a vulnerability with the Nikon implementation where you could add additional pictures, and that through this informal process was exposed and addressed. So I think there's definitely there's room for community, and I think that's a mechanism, not necessarily formalized, but it is part of the entire mechanism for resolving issues, identifying and resolving issues.
Simon, you wanted to add something?
No, I don't think so. I think, I just kind of maybe thinking about the speed of which you were just talking, right? Between Comfy UI, I think, almost the UI for AI, right, has enabled a different conversation, and maybe a conversation that we haven't truly engaged in, I think would be, I just reflected on what you said, Jason. I think it was a good call.
Mm-hmm. Good. So what's the consensus? We need a loose community which can feed into a much more controlled, still open community to solve the issues together. Kind of a thing in between, whatever that could mean. Yeah?
One thing that the tech industry is famous for is developing things that people were unaware that they needed. Right? We live in an industry where there's a distinct need. People need to make content and they have certain things they need to do. So it's a little harder to get, look at the number of nonlinear editing systems out there right now. You can count them on less than one hand.
Yep.
We don't need more of those things because there's no demand for it, right? But when we have these new tools, sometimes we have to, yes, we do have to go outside the box and go, look at this amazing thing that we can do. And people are like, that's great. I would never use that, but that's great. So we do have to then start, from a technology standpoint, start listening to what do people want to do with this thing. And that's where it gets into this idea where we have to conform to certain ways that people do things. But the speed with which we work right now is unlike anything anybody's used to. I mean, when was the last time you had a software update on any piece of software you have that happened within 2 weeks? Maybe, it happens all the time now.
I was going to say, I think there's an educational component here too, right? Buzz, you work on your side and certainly on the AWS side too. I think, a lot of products that get created have product leaders who don't understand the requirements of the industry, right? Especially as we do more things with, like, I'll say Microsoft Foundry and the stuff we do with Sora, for example. But I know working with people in the background, you're like, do you understand what the industry actually has to work on? How are you going to store that content? What metadata is going to attach to it? What does the sidecar file look like? And how does this going to get stored? All of that stuff is not truly understood, right? So I think there's some education that needs to go on well beyond, right, who we think we need to talk to. I don't know if you agree. I just think there's more, and the security piece is fundamentally to that too. I think there's just more education we need to do.
Getting back to Jason's point, Comfy UI is a perfect example. It came out of necessity. It wasn't like, oh, this would be neat. I wonder what I'll use it for. No, they had a very specific need, which is, I have this API and I don't know what to do with it. The way we describe it internally is, media customers don't buy APIs. It's like handing somebody a bucket of yarn and a couple of needles saying, knock yourself out, make yourself a jump.
I think you're all talking about the third question, which I have here.
Okay.
Yep.
Go for it.
What are you with the third?
So I was just going to add to a little bit of that where, there's a new way of interacting with a tool that nobody's ever done before. And it's not just happening with images. It's also with code, right? So people that were not coders are now or people, even better, people that were already coders are finding huge, improvements in their abilities and the amount of lines of code that they can write and the quality that they can write. Using vibe coding on Cursor or name your favorite platform. So this winds up being an integration or an activation. Now that I think points to also security questions, right? So there's lots of ways to make a function. Even Cursor or ChatGPT doesn't agree on the same way to do it in the same program. So you've got it's a bit of a mess. Those models I think are going to catch up, but I think from the interaction, from being able to just talk and ask and then have a conversation, I think it's a really powerful interface. It's changing the way people work.
Awesome. I start with you. You're lucky that I'm a user, or representing a huge user community as well. And what we are hearing, and I'm just reflecting, probably you have similar things, what you hear, a little bit from the business perspective. Imagine you run a broadcast station, you run a big production studio, you have responsibilities. And then you're faced with this you've mentioned it all, this immense speed of development. Every week, a super new tool, and you have all your staff saying, "Oh, I need the new tool." It costs, of course, and the tool costs, and then you have cloud service and everything adding up. And next week again, and next week again, and next week again. So my bosses are, of course, in the broadcast side, they are really, really, really questioning where is my ROI, and how can I manage this immense speed of development. On the one hand, I want to give capabilities to all my staff to be more efficient, better production, faster production, On the other hand, all of that costs, and the integration of the tools costs. And then security maybe is an issue. So are we lost? Is there a reason also for interoperability? Is there such a thing? I don't know. Let's start with AWS.
I think that's a great question. And in the end, it all comes down to ROI. So if a project is not making money, that's going to lose its funding at some point. So one of the things I see with a lot of the companies I work with is that, interestingly, a lot of AI projects are streamlining workflows that already exist. So they were already transcribing, they were already tagging their videos, they were creating the post-production packages. So AI is not. So these use cases where you already have positive ROI, where there's profits being made, AI is just streamlining that workflow. So if anything, it's actually unleashing more ROI. Now, at the same time, it is possible to burn that ROI by constantly upgrading to new standards, and there might be other expenses involved. But at least you start out with a workflow that is making money, and you're looking at ways of streamlining it. But the other aspect of that is, I think that's where interoperability is also useful, because interoperability reduces the cost of migrating even within the same application to the next version. So if you have a standard way of interacting with LLMs or agents, then as you upgrade your LLMs or your hardware, you don't necessarily have to build from the ground up. So I feel like what I sense from the media customers is that they have a positive expectation of the ROI and are interested in looking at ways of streamlining these workflows.
Okay. Gentlemen.
An easy ROI for most companies that they're probably not aware of that they can access is most companies in the media entertainment field are sitting on a whole huge mine of data, right? And it's a database. Like your company's been open 100 years, but your entire storage library is you haven't hired a digital librarian in several decades to, curate that to make sure you can find everything. It's largely useless if you can't find the data inside of your own database. So I think there are a lot of easy workflows that we can talk about. Video search and summarization, where you ask an agent to find clips that are relevant to a particular thing. You can talk to them in human language. You can build clips that activates things that haven't been seen in years, seen daylight in years. You would never hire anybody to go through all of that data, hundreds of thousands of hours of content to be able to find that. So, or if you're looking for assets like 3D models or textures, all of those things, it's so much data. Most companies don't actually know what's in there. So I think that's an easy ROI for companies to jump onto.
I mean, if we could now talk a lot about, I like the idea. I think we all like the idea. We all know what certain people amongst the organizations will say, and they will say probably, my data is not going to leave my house, which means we need to generate safe data spaces. That could be another topic to address, but let's come back. Let's not discuss this. Let's come back to the business questions. Simon.
I love the ROI question, primarily because obviously at Microsoft, we care very much about that too, right? And all the investments that we make in artificial intelligence and all the rest of it. But for customers, I think it's interesting. I can only relate it to how I work with different customers, right? Which is you find yourself in one of two situations. I've either got a legacy tech stack that I got to work with, or I'm building something I've never built. Right. But whatever I've got from an underlying platform perspective, could be the data, could be the content, right? There's easy lifts and shifts that I can go and do. I think, obviously sure, on the AWS and Google side, right, we get asked for a lot of credits to go and explore how certain things could actually be done because we want to prove them out. I've been involved in a million conversations about total cost of ownership, right? Right. What does that look like long term? Are you really saving me money or not? Right? I think, is it going to be cheaper to do it this way or not? Well, I have to prove that out to you. Right? So in some cases, right, whether it's building an agent, building a platform, working with a model, whatever else it might be, I can tell you that we fundamentally are not asking some of the right questions. Right? So you talk about using a model. Okay, well then how many tokens am I burning? What does that look like? Right? And if I'm burning a lot of tokens, how much compute and capacity am I going to use to burn all of that stuff? And how much am I going to need? Right? I think the fundamental question we should be asking ourselves for ROI is, am I going to have enough computer capacity to run everything I want to run from an agent and AI-based world moving forward? And how much is that going to cost me in comparison to what I'm trying to do today?
Right? And you want a ticker which says, oh.
Well, but I also want to be smart about it, right? So to your point, Jason, right, about how do I know which model is best to use at the right time? How do I burn less tokens? How am I making my system intelligent enough to understand what to happen? If Buzz needs a file, how do I know which one to translate into one file processor or another? Because I know that Buzz always needs it, right? And so that's where MCP comes in, right? Because if I can make it smart enough to do it, then it'll be smart enough to be more efficient in terms of what it's going to burn from a cost perspective. So I think, it is a conversation that hasn't changed since we started talking about the cloud, right? I know we're transitioning those workloads. Now it's just a different form of that conversation.
I think the conversation has changed in the sense that it's much more urgent now.
No, it is. I agree.
The adoption rate is so.
And there's an expectation that everyone's doing something with AI, right? And how do they make that part? I can tell you, listening to the people at Disney, for example, it's like, well, how am I going to change my workflows and do this stuff to make myself more efficient? And it's the same with every studio to some degree, right? Buzz, would you agree?
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. But actually, speaking of standardization, I have a request. Can we standardize TCO calculators, please?
We've got our own. We can offer something in there.
It's such a useless metric because we measure it differently than they do. And it's just like, but what I think is interesting now is people are taking a more serious look at risk analysis. Like, what is the risk of not doing this? And that factors into what we used to consider maybe an ROI because, we all know content production has gotten very expensive. I'm not sure we can flip a switch and make that change overnight, but, I do think that there's some interesting ways to look at the problem. And some of it is just like if I'm one of the things that getting back to the whole early adoption of cloud systems is
the best advantage you have for a customer is the thing that you can't really prove to them up front, which is the efficiency gain you get from it, right? Because most people don't measure inefficiency. If they did, they wouldn't have it, right? So you get to prove the savings you have on that where, once you've implemented it. But prior to that, it's very, very difficult. So we fall into this dangerous trust me territory, which is a horrible place to be. But I do think people are now taking more of a risk analysis approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the ROI, yes, it's important, but it's not everything.
Yeah, to add to that, you mentioned being able to try different models. You don't necessarily need a PhD level model for every task. People are hopping onto standards like OpenAI's API standard, right? Where you can just developers then switch out what model you're pointing to, and they can test where they can say, okay, it's more important that I have a quick first time to token response. So if I need a really quick response back from the user, or I can let it think for a little while longer and I can get a smarter answer, or I can use a bigger model because I'm going to need a larger machine to be able to handle that, or something local because I want to make sure it's behind a wall of safety in my own company.
So smart control and monitoring, if you want.
I think also, I mean, Jason, I have to ask both these guys. I mean, but I think there's honestly probably a faster refactoring state that's also going on, right? As you look and learn about these models, you're kind of going, oh, I need to quickly refine, right? Because you're learning so fast about how you can optimize for ROI, for example.
Yeah. And one of the things I think we all have to be careful of is it's really easy with a lot of the chat robots and things that are out there right now is to use a deep research model to figure out where a pizza place is near you. It's a giant waste of resources to use these models, but the users don't know the difference. They may not have changed that pull down, and they're asking a ridiculously expensive question without knowing it. So from consumer standpoint, it's fine. But once you're in a business and queries cost money, then suddenly you realize, oh my God, people are taxing these models in all the wrong ways.
Yeah. And I think there is also a variety of use cases. So not everything is ROI positive. There's also a lot of very speculative projects people embark on with and burn through a lot of tokens without much to show for. So I think businesses are also getting smarter about this. So in the beginning, when AI first came out, there was a lot of hackathons and people building very cool projects, but not necessarily with ROI. But I think the trend I see is that customers and media companies are paying more attention to ROI moving forward.
We come to the last question. It's a very easy one. So you need to complete a sentence. The sentence is a very easy one. In the next 12 months, in the field of AI and media workflows, of course, I wish that SMPTE, and then you need to complete the sentence. A super easy one. Of course, you're unprepared. I know you're unprepared. You can think 1 minute, but this is also a very important element which you might want. If you agree or not agree, you pick up the idea, amplify the idea, and push it into our app for the unconference, which comes in a second. Who wants to start?
I can hop in.
Okay, so the sentence was, in the next 12 months, and in the field of AI and media workflows, I wish that SMPTE
would reach out. Don't wait, right? You're doing a great thing here talking about it. That's a good first step. But I think as far as standards go, don't look and wait for the dust to settle. Reach out to companies, other groups, platforms that you see where you can reach and lend out a hand. A lot of folks don't understand all the thought that goes into building a really robust structure and for the future. And they haven't really thought about it in this way. They don't have that mindset. They're just working on making a script. And I've seen this many times with programmers. They'll do something that works right there for that moment, and they're not thinking about the future. So I think having this conversation with all of these groups is a really important thing to include.
Thank you.
I think definitely the one thing I would say SMPTE should continue doing is having forums like this and these kind of panel discussions, because just like we want our tools to talk to each other, we also want to interoperate with each other as well. And I think the importance of this is that it lets us keep a radar out on emerging standards, because this is a very dynamic space. So you have frequently there's just open source solutions like Comfy UI and other things that were mentioned that but also TAMS is another example where you have an open source implementation which is on its way to becoming a standard. So I think these kinds of meetings and this community enables detecting standards as they emerge and then making sure they have a working group and a task force and perhaps a standard at the end.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. In the next 12 months in the field of AI and media workflows, Simon wishes that SMPTE
a Christmas wish. I don't know. Look, I think we've talked a lot about the importance of data. I'm sure you have for the last 3.5 days. I can't emphasize enough the importance of data. At every studio I've ever been at, it's never been good enough. I think it's been in silos, not managed in the right way. We're finding out that that's the case now as we try and use more AI around it. For me, I would love this organization to think about the way that, as we evolve from content that has always been human made to humans and a machine making the content, right, in partnership, not just machines. I will never say that. But I think as that content gets created, how do we think about the standards of watermarking and metadata and the standards around all of those pieces as it is done in a time-sensitive way, right? Because we are creating content at light speed, right? So what is the standard around that? What is the acceptable quality that can exist that we could work through? That is, for me, I think through that lens primarily because of the customers that I see dealing with those challenges today. It's not disappearing, right? It's only getting worse. And I think if we're going to be doing things with that data, especially if we're thinking about real-time AI, maybe even using edge compute to do things and transitioning to the way the context appears on our screens, our devices, and that kind of stuff, it's going to be very, very important to have some standards around that. That we haven't truly thought through. If you look at the speed of the content that's getting created, even the AI stuff today, or the prompts that are appearing right all everywhere, where are the standards around that stuff? They don't exist. Right? And so for me, that is a huge opportunity, right, for this organization to maintain credibility and relevance and engaging those groups in that conversation. So that is my perspective.
Fantastic input.
I'll add attribution is another great one. You just throw it in there as for standards. That's what I think we're really missing in.
What can we do for Buzz?
So I have two answers to the question. Sorry. First one is the 12-month one, which is I would like to see standards committees out there, because one of the things that I think is one of the greatest use cases of generative AI models especially is repairing old stuff, reformatting old stuff. I want to get from standard def to high def. I want to train on video errors so I can fix those video errors. There needs to be some working groups around understanding how this data gets used as training data. It's not so that we can copy all the characters in Cheers. We don't care about that. We care about how do we come up with an intelligent model to deinterlace. We need lots of content to be able to fix that kind of a problem. So I think having some very specific outcomes of these is very important. But my second ask, which is not 12 months, sorry, it's right this second. Let's take the entire SMPTE standards archive and make it searchable using semantic search and things like to plug Notebook LM, ways we can ask questions about all these standards at scale, because we can already do that.
Yeah, maybe put a chatbot on it so you can just talk to the SMPTE standards directly. I love it though.
I think that speaks to something though, right? From an industry standpoint, right? If you think about what's just occurring in our industry, we are going from a don't click to ask, right? Conversation, right?
Right.
And so as we ask faster, it's almost okay, what platform am I going to go to get the information, right? And so if you can provide it fast and it's there, whether it's, ChatGPT or another LLM asking for it, right? It's going to be important because it's going to whoever gets the answer. And that's what they're going to move forward with because they're not going to wait. I think that's what I'm saying. It's not where you click, it's what you ask.
Fantastic ideas on this panel. Fantastic ideas. I need to take the ball. In case that SMPTE management, where are you? Identify yourself.
Hiding in the back.
In case that SMPTE management would decide to make all of this available, they would need help. I assume all of you together collaboratively would help in making everything through the machine, make it semantically searchable. Good. Yep. Here are, pick them.
First is the educational material, and then it's the city chapters around the globe.
If you need GPU power, over there. If you need software development capabilities, over here. Here you go.
Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, I allow one question in the room.
Answer your question. And the answer right here, because I asked.
Yeah, well, the question is whether you believe everything now. Oh. Keep your critical thinking, Pat, please.
Yeah.
No, over
One
here.
second,
Andy, please.
Great panel, by the way. This may be a tough question to answer. But funding for all these great ideas. All right. So SMPTE does a mighty job with a small staff. And, it just seems like that, it's hard to get these collaborative things funded. Do you have thoughts on that? I mean, do we pass the hat around here? Do we go to the big companies? Do we do a telethon? I mean, what do you think about that?
Who wants to take that?
Who's the next Jerry Lewis? Is that you?
I mean, I think on the Microsoft side, I can't speak for Buzz or the other folks on the panel. I would say that, like, how do I say this when no one else is in the room?
It's not recorded, and
okay.
nobody will remember what
So, I think, there's obviously a lot of money that's involved in all of our companies that are on the stage today, right? I think, and it is kind of like getting blood out of a stone internally sometimes. I'm going to be honest. I think, part of it is, like I went back to education. If you were to talk about SMPTE inside Microsoft, many people will not have any idea what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I think a little bit more of, yes, we come, we like to participate, yes, we join as members, but I think, we need to help kind of do more to bring us into the fold sometimes. I think, we're happy to join. We support the initiatives that are going on, but for me, I think it's going to have to meet in the middle somewhere. I think, we'd love to do more. I think we understand the initiatives that are put together. I think, there are lots of groups out there. I mean, Buzz, you probably see the same thing and others, right? We can only fund so many different things that go on. I think, I would just like to see us maybe just get together more frequently and just have conversations and maybe invite you to come in to talk about what you're doing, because there's a lot of product people inside Microsoft who wouldn't know what's going on. And I think that's a little bit down to us, maybe engaging with you differently.
What do the others think?
Wow. Yeah. I've worked in many places that were so budget constrained that we often, joked around bake sales and things like that to finance these types of efforts. Usually those are passion projects that are done by a single person, and then they wind up becoming contagious, and getting gloms or groups of people to believe. And that goes up into open source projects. So that's where I would go, is a community-based effort, but it takes a village, and I think we need lots of people to get behind that. Mm-hmm. Not easy.
It's much like the ASWF, right, Andy? I mean, you need the collection of the village to be able to make these things happen. And, I don't think any one organization, I mean, there's a bunch of benefactors in various organizations, but we don't own super yachts, any of us, so we're not the ones. But, I think the collective spirit on things like what ASWF is doing with the Academy and Linux Foundation is a way to aggregate the interest in it, which then ultimately, hopefully gives you access to the funding.
Mm-hmm. And I think I would add one other thing to it, that besides all the people here and the people in the industry who would help, there's also all these agents that are now available. So that might be a way of building your SMPTE chatbot, is by just using an AI to build a lot of it. So by vibe coding it, you might be able to do it. This might not be as big a lift as it was 2 years ago.
Maybe some of it is not money, it's resources. I oftentimes say that to people. I think, all of us probably get asked for sponsorship at one point or time for something. And I say, well, money's great, but if we can't show up, what does it matter? There you go, right? Exactly, right? It is butts in seats sometimes that really make the difference about how this could work. And I think that's just a conversation we haven't had enough of.
A great one. It's funny. I was having this internal conversation with my manager a couple of years ago because we have this concept of spot bonuses where if somebody helps me out, I can give them a little bonus. And I said, you know what I want for a bonus? I want access to the DeepMind team for 2 hours. That's way more valuable to me than, a token thing. So I think the resources, to Simon's point, I think is extremely important.
Alex, we need to red light.
Oh,
red light.
Hello.
Here's the thing now. I know. Here's the thing now.
Ready, Hans?
Yeah, I know. Party time. The unconference is going to start quickly. Last chance, not last chance, but put your stuff in. Because here's Willem Vermoost, Mr. MXL and DMF in one person from the EBU, European Broadcasting Union, who volunteered kindly to say, I pick everything what they say. I will put it into Pat's ChatGPT, try to figure out what it says. And then we try to bring this in a condensed form, to our unconference conversation. But, please join me. This is an exceptional super panel.